Since I've started this YouTube channel, I'm starting to realize that if I didn't have bad luck, I wouldn't have any luck at all. About a month ago, we talked about a company I used to work at. Back when it was Ultimate Software, I think around 2016 I worked there, and to me, it was the worst place I ever worked. There was clicks and backstabbing. They didn't know how to do hybrid and they refused to do remote. I got threatened with a performance improvement plan. They made me feel like I was an idiot and doing a terrible job. It got so bad that after about 9 months of working at that organization, I literally couldn't take it another day. Late at night, I dropped off my laptop and my badge and wrote a little note and I said, I'm just not coming back here anymore. I just can't do this anymore. God bless. And now, today, we got to talk about another company that I worked at, also for about 9 months. So fast forward to 2021. I quit my job to be able to travel the world. I wanted to see all the whole world that God has to offer, and there was no better time than the present, and I didn't want to wait until I was 6 years old. So I spent all of 2021 traveling. Of course, I got out of debt. I saved up enough money to be able to travel for more than a year, but I just went and traveled for a year, and then I got a remote job at General Motors as a contractor. And I got that job around February until about December. That job was interesting because around that time, it was certainly an employee's market. So I had a couple of different job offers to accept. Now this one, I honestly don't even remember the interview. Now I didn't go into the interview looking homeless or any other kind of crazy stuff like that. I took it seriously and I must have done a good job, but I mean, this was back when almost every single time I actually made it to a hiring manager, I got an offer, and I wasn't special. I wasn't alone in that fact. So I got a good job offer. Even though I really don't remember the interview, I went ahead and took it. And I was a contractor, so they had a bunch of other people working on my team with me as well from that same staffing agency. That was where everything kind of went wrong. Because we weren't officially members of the GM roster, we didn't have access to anything. I couldn't direct message people. I couldn't send emails to people. At least I couldn't look up their name in the email directory. We didn't have access to the documentation we needed. It was a complete disaster. Because of that and because of the freshers from the US, now maybe if we had freshers from India, it would be a different story, but the freshers, which is, I guess, in American speak, the new college graduates that were on my team were absolutely terrible and absolutely unprepared, and there was only so much that I could do to lead this team as a project manager. So it didn't work out very long, and even though I signed a 1-year contract in February, they decided to part ways with our team back in December. So does that count as a layoff? Let me know. I feel like we either got fired or, like they said in Office Space, they fixed the glitch and they avoided confrontation. They're like, oh, we were just looking over our numbers and we decided not to continue. Well, usually you don't continue a contract once the contract is over. Like if I had worked the full year into February, then they could have said, oh, we're not going to renew. That seems more appropriate than, hey, you signed a year contract, we signed a year contract, and we should both try to honor it. It's not like it was a 5-year contract, a 10-year contract. Anyways, doesn't really matter why, I guess, but after December, didn't have a job there anymore. So that's 2 different companies that I've worked at as an adult with a master's degree, with certifications, in which I didn't make it longer than 9 months. I guess the first time I could have, sucked it up, made it work out, but then the second time, really, honestly, to no fault of my own, my tenure at General Motors was ended. That brings us to today, and once again, another layoff. So maybe it was me, maybe I was a bad employee, but maybe this job market is just terrible. And maybe there's no good companies to work for. That's what I like to believe. That helps me sleep at night. So our first article today is from CNBC. And as always, all of my articles are linked down in the description below, so you can read the full thing. I'm just going to talk about the things pertaining to our little chat today. The headline is, GM lays off more than 1,000 salaried software and services employees. Which, back to what I was doing, I was working in software. I mean, my official title was a project manager. And back then, since we were consultants, not, I guess, real GM employees, not real boys, we were easy to lay off. Now, based on this headline, it's making it seem like they're laying off 1,000 people who are actual proper GM employees. So usually with a layoff, that's kind of how they do it. It's easier to cut ties with the contracted employees, the people who aren't getting full benefits and all this kind of stuff that they didn't spend so much time and effort recruiting, and then also get rid of the new hires. And then after that, then if they haven't turned things around, then they can go and release the people who are actual full-time salaried employees. The article goes on to say, General Motors is laying off more than 1,000 salaried employees globally in its software and services division following a review to streamline the unit's operations, CNBC has learned. The layoffs, including roughly 600 jobs at GM's tech campus near Detroit, come less than 6 months after leadership changes overseeing the operations, including former Apple executive Mike Abbott leaving the automaker after less than a year in March due to health reasons. As we build GM's future, we must simplify for speed and excellence, make bold choices, and prioritize the investments that will have the greatest impact, a GM spokesperson said in an email statement. As a result, we're reducing certain teams within the software and services division. We are grateful to those who helped establish a strong foundation that positions GM to lead moving forward. So throughout our history, GM has been through a lot. In recent episodes, we talked about everything that people in Washington went through with, I believe, Nike layoffs, and I think Intuit was a big employer there. And now we're talking about Detroit, which has suffered a lot throughout its time with people trying to get jobs. So now I think GM has more people who are remote based or based in other parts of the country, but if you were just a GM employee in Detroit, you're like, hey, I'm gonna work at its headquarters. Now 600 people in Detroit have lost a job, and it's not like Detroit is a wonderful market to find a new job either. And we've talked about the importance of leadership and management in previous episodes, and I'm gonna continue to talk about it going forward. But yeah, we see another example of just not having strong or at least consistent leadership. And now we see Mike Abbott leaving the automaker after less than a year. I mean, yeah, you need to have a plan, you need to have a strategy, but you also need to have a consistent vision and consistently go after the same thing. If you're constantly switching leaderships, I mean, it's unfortunate if it's for health reasons, but really for any reason, you're gonna be in a world of hurt a lot of times. The answer never seems to be things are too expensive. We need to lower cost. And I know what you're saying. Well, things are tough out there. It is hard to get the supplies and the materials, and labor itself is expensive. Well, yeah, but why is nobody's plan, why is nobody's intention to try to make more money? I mean, you look at Walmart and yeah, they're making changes and they're rolling back prices even more. But also, how did they become so successful? How did they get such a good market share? It was lower prices and then the ability to sell at a volume that nobody could replicate. It seems like most of these organizations that we're going over, their strategy is not to lower their prices and get more customers in. Their strategy is not to increase their customer service and retain more customers. Their strategy is simply to raise prices. Even if less people buy, at least their per ticket percentage or their per ticket profit will go up, which doesn't work. And then the employees who are working there, working hard, doing everything they're asked to do, have to suffer and then lose their job. So the strategy is not working, guys. I mean, what is it going to take to realize you have to lower prices? And maybe you can't pay your CEO as much, but with the direction that most of these CEOs are driving their companies into, I really don't think that's going to be a big problem. Your number one thing needs to be, how are you going to make these customers happy? Because yes, you can drive up shareholder value and you can drive up the stock price, but eventually the rubber is going to meet the road and you're going to be in a situation where nobody's going to do business with you, and then that's definitely not good for your stock price. That's definitely not good for shareholder value. The article goes on to say that GM declined to disclose the full number of layoffs, but a source familiar with the matter, who declined to be named because the information is private, confirmed more than 1,000 salaried employees would be laid off, including 600 in Warren, Michigan. Impacted employees were notified Monday morning. The layoffs represent about 1.3% of the company's global salaried workforce of 76,000 as of the end of last year. That included about 53,000 US salaried employees. So for GM, that's still, I think, a pretty good percentage of people to be let go. And it's one thing if it's like 5 to 10 people, but it doesn't matter what the percentage is. If we're talking about 1,000 employees and 600 in one location, that is still a pretty big drop off. And yeah, we've talked about bigger numbers previously, like 7%, 11%, even 15% of the workforce. But with General Motors, a legacy corporation that you'd love to see grow and thrive and be innovative, take things to the next level and make an American product that we can be proud of, you don't want to see a company like that struggling, but all these companies are struggling. So, we don't want to get to the point of John Deere where we have another American legacy brand shipped off to another country. So hopefully GM can turn these things around. The article goes on to say, the cuts come as automakers attempt to reduce cost and, in many instances, employee handout amid fears of an industry downturn. And as they're spending billions of dollars on emerging markets such as all-electric vehicles and so-called software-defined vehicles. And perhaps it was my experience at GM with the drive to have all-electric vehicles, right? That was a political push to make sure that by a certain year or whatever, at least most of vehicles would be electric. Like this agenda that doesn't make any sense being pushed onto organizations. I think that's kind of one of the main reasons I poo-poo AI all the time, and the fact that it's going to really take high quality, high skilled people's jobs. I mean, companies are definitely looking for ways to reduce cost, but nobody talks about how software actually comes at a cost. You got to have people maintain it. You got to pay the licensing fees. You got to pay for the consultants to implement it and maintain it. It's not like, oh, magically, I'm just going to enter things into the internet for free and I'm going to change things around and I'm not going to have to have half of my workforce because I have this AI. I mean, the reality is computers are only as smart as the people training them. And according to most of these executives, their people aren't very smart. I don't agree with that, but if they think their employees aren't very smart, why do they think people training robots and AI is going to work? Another thing with these EVs, I mean, it doesn't work. The USA is a huge country. Maybe if we were in a smaller land situation like Switzerland or something like that, you could take an EV vehicle from one end to the other. I'm just giving that as an example. I really don't know how far they go, but I'm pretty sure you can't take an electric vehicle from New York to Los Angeles without charging it, right? So then what are you going to do? And I know not everyone is going cross country, but I mean, in a car, you could stop and you could fuel your vehicle basically every few miles. You're really not going to run into any issues. But do we really have enough charging stations for someone to take long road trips with their EV? And then, yeah, the power to charge it and the fact that you got to charge it so much. I mean, it's really not simple. If you're going to revolutionize the industry and you're going to change things up, you should make it simpler and lower cost. EV cars are way more expensive than getting a nice used car. I know people are going crazy with their car payments right now, and that's part of GM's problem. They're just accepting the fact that they're seeing on TikTok that people are spending $700 to $1,000 in car payments, thinking that that's normal and that that's okay and that's sustainable, but it's really, really not. So their combustible engine department is really not in a good place since their cars are so dang expensive. Yeah, that might be nice and they might be cheaper to fix than a foreign car because there might be more people who are skilled in being able to do so. But yeah, the price of a new vehicle is just insane right now. And yeah, like I said, I mean, once we get to the point of people not being able to make their $700 to $1,000 car payments and things start getting repossessed, then that's gonna look a lot worse than it's looking now, where people are just YOLOing all of their money down the drain. And then with these EV vehicles, yeah, I mean, where can you really go? You have to charge all the time. And then we're also seeing news reports of people parking where the EV stations are located to charge, so people can't get access to their charging stations. There's not enough charging stations to make a road trip for a lot of people. It's just not set up properly, and then the cars themselves are more expensive. So if you're going to revolutionize the car industry, you want to make sure that it's a car that everyone can afford. Now, is this quote true? I don't really know, but everyone credits Ford for saying he wanted to pay his employees enough to be able to afford their products. So when he created his first line of popular industry-leading cars, the idea was he was going to pay people and create a 40-hour work week and pay people enough to be able to go and afford the product. I'm not sure that the average employee at GM can afford any of these other high price ticket items. I mean, if these cars are getting close to $100,000 right now and car payments are getting somewhere between $700 and $1,000, especially with the price of rent or property taxes or whatever you have to pay, I don't think the average GM employee has that kind of disposable income to sustainably afford one of their brand new GM vehicles. Whether it's combustion engine, a traditional car, or it's an EV car. And then you add all the hassle of the EV cars having to charge it, having to maintain it, look for charging stations while you're out and about. There aren't really a lot of good solutions being presented currently by GM. The article goes on to say software, especially monetizing it, has been a major focus on automakers, including GM, as it eyes recurring revenue opportunities such as subscriptions to boost profits. Yeah, that's another thing that we heard about was they're doing subscriptions for things instead of just paying one flat out price, like subscription for your global navigation or subscription. Well, we know for like Sirius Radio, that makes sense. But like, I think I even saw like subscriptions for like heating and other kind of bells and whistles on your car. So instead of just you buying it with everything, so things are more expensive than ever. And now they want to not only get your price one time, but they want to get recurring payments out of you for things that used to become basic. I mean, it's just greed. It says the software and services division covers a wide variety of areas for the automaker, including infotainment, its OnStar brands. Yeah, OnStar. So like, I think basic navigation. I mean, can't you just pop up your phone and put in Google Maps? And emerging areas such as subscriptions and other vehicle features and development. Two GM executives, Baris Sentiak and Dave Richardson, succeeded Abbott, who was named GM's first executive vice president of software in May 2023. They are based at GM's Mountain View Technical Center in California. Sentiak, a veteran software executive, serves as senior vice president of software and services product management, and services product management, program management, and design. He oversees the teams responsible for GM's software roadmap design and the process for software program development, launch, and improvements. Richardson, GM's Senior Vice President of Software and Services Engineering, leads software engineering, including areas like embedded platforms, digital products, commercial solutions, and advanced driver assistance systems, such as GM's Super Cruise. Our second article is from Reuters, and I just want to talk about the things that are different in this one than in our first article. The headline is, GM lays off over 1,000 salaried software services employees. And it talks about the same things we talked about, but it also goes on to say, in April 2023, GM said about 5,000 of its salaried workers took buyouts to leave the company as it worked to hit a $2 billion cost-cutting target after it cut hundreds of executive-level and salary jobs in February 2023. And this is something that we've talked about a lot as well. You got to read the writing on the wall. You have to pay attention. If you just close your eyes and pretend like everything is fine, that is not a good strategy. In the world that we live in, you have to just accept that things are going to potentially go terribly wrong, and you have to figure out what's going on and figure out if you have to have a plan B. Now, you could sit around if you've been at a company for a long time and wait for some kind of buyout if you think you're going to have a nice severance package, but while you're doing that, just in case you don't get a good severance package, you need to be paying your debt down, you need to be storing up some money, you need to be ready for the potential thing to happen if you're not gonna go out and try to find a new job right away, which is what you probably should be doing. But if you're here in 2024 and then you're one of the 1,000 people affected, I mean, this should not come from out of the blue, right? I mean, you should be looking at news reports and looking at what's happening in other divisions, even if it's not particularly yours at the organization. So, they said in February 2023, they cut hundreds of executive level jobs. You're not gonna cut executive level jobs if everything is fine. So you need to pay attention to that. And then in April of 2023, they did voluntary buyouts for about 5,000 of its salaried employees. And you've laid off executives and offered voluntary separation packages to 5,000 people. Nobody should say that they were caught off guard. Nobody should be able to see that they didn't see it coming. And like I said, maybe you're waiting for your severance package, fair enough. And maybe you are trying to find a job and you haven't been able to, fair enough, but this should not catch you off guard basically a year after this process has already started, because a lot of companies are not just going to, out of the blue, fire 10 to 15% of their workforce. Every single company we've gone over, and we've done deep dives into this, it's not just out of the blue. Layoffs have already started, sometimes as much as a year in advance of the bigger layoffs. So that is what's going on with General Motors. And we've also looked at what's happened in the previous year with executive layoffs, with voluntary separations. I've shared my personal history and stories as a GM employee, and it's not looking good for General Motors. I mean, it's not looking good for a lot of American businesses, but I wanted to take the time to go over and share my personal views and my personal experiences with this brand. Are things going to get better? Is this the final layoff that they're going to have to make to right the ship? I don't know. Based off its history, it's not looking like it, and it's not looking too good. Talk to you later.